The trade deadline proved to be a dud for the Atlanta Falcons. Let's break down why.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use code in all lowercase LockedOnNFL to win $50 instantly when you play $5. So, guys, if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Mr. Drew, aka the Jolly Green Giant, aka Mr. aka and I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at FalFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. We're almost inching our way to 2,000 episodes for myself on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that has been an everydayer throughout that time, whether this is your first episode or your 2,000th episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast. And all you have to do to become an everydayer subscriber, follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today's episode is a Week 9 All-22 review, where I'll be giving you the scoop on some of the highlights of the Falcons defense against the Dallas Cowboys, as well as some of the highlights about the Falcons offense, talking about Darnell Mooney and admitting I was wrong about Darnell Mooney. So we'll get into that at this point in time, as well as revisit the Kirk Cousins Chaos Meter, because we got to revise that a little bit, and some other topics on today's episode. But of course, we got to start out with what did not happen on Tuesday, on November 5th. We're not talking politics here on the podcast. We're talking about the Atlanta Falcons not making a move at the trade deadline. There was a lot of action elsewhere in the NFL. I believe 8 trades happened, including 2 pass rushers. Zadarius Smith going to the Detroit Lions, Preston Smith going to the Pittsburgh Steelers. You saw Monday, Baron Browning going to the Arizona Cardinals, Josh Uche going to the Chiefs last week. But the Falcons, who many have been expecting to make a move for a pass rusher, an edge rusher, over the last week or so, did not make that move. And a lot of people over the weekend, as we discussed on Sunday's Rapid Reaction, we're connecting the Falcons to the New York Giants Azeez Ojulari. And there were reports that emerged early on Tuesday on the trade deadline that the Giants weren't going to give Azeez Ojulari. There was reports that they wanted a late 4th or an early 5th round pick for him. The Falcons have one of those. It's about all they really have to trade at this point in time, since they lack a 3rd, a 5th, a 6th round picks due to previous trades and tampering charges. And they were unwilling to get that up. And a lot of people are wondering why, how could the Falcons? And the simple answer is it wasn't worth it. And we'll break down why. I think first of all, I don't know if Ojulari or really any of these pass rushers are going to single-handedly fix your pass rush, right? That basically any move that the Falcons made is really going to move the needle, in the sense of you're going to go from, where they currently are, a bottom 3 pass rush, whether you look at sacks or pressures, to probably a bottom 6 pass rush when you look at sacks or pressures. And is giving up a 4th round pick worth that type of move? I don't think so, but your mileage may vary in that regard. And some, have likened it to the difference of, hey, if you go out there and make this trade, it may be the difference between winning and losing a playoff game. And that's certainly a possibility. I still probably think you're overrating the impact of one individual pass rusher in that regard. But it's certainly a possibility that, a pressure or sack here or there might be the difference between winning and losing a close ball game in the second or first round, or the first or second round of the playoffs, and whatnot. But I think the second thing, and I explained this somewhat on Sunday, so I'll revisit it here today. If you give up a 4th, specifically a 4th, you're basically making the bet that Azeez Ojulari is a significantly better player than Arnold Ebiketie, and you want to build around Azeez Ojulari as opposed to Arnold Ebiketie. And I don't think the Falcons are ready to make that choice, nor do I think they should be able to make that choice, right? And I don't think you can confidently say, oh, yes, Azeez Ojulari is definitely better than Arnold Ebiketie. And I think a lot of you guys are like, how can you not say that, Aaron? Azeez Ojulari has 6 sacks and Arnold Ebiketie only has 1. He's way better. And it's like, well, okay, you're once again aware of the volatility of sacks, because Arnold Ebiketie had 6 sacks last year, and yet he's playing much better football this year and only has 1 sack, right? And you look at the last 4 weeks where you've had Arnold Ebiketie, quote unquote, breakout, right, where he's played much better football than he did over the first month of the season. And similarly, Azeez Ojulari has been starting over the last month in place of Kayvon Thibodeau and has had a lot of his production and from a pressure and sack standpoint in the last 4 weeks. And you look at those last 4 games, they both have similar pressure rates, right? I think Ojulari is like 15% and AK is like 14%. So again, not a significant difference. Now, Ojulari has 5 sacks while AK only has 1. But the issue with Ojulari's sacks is a lot of those are what our good buddy Brandon Thorne, a friend of the podcast, would qualify as probably low quality sacks, right? Or cleanup sacks and whatnot. I believe the one arguably high quality sack that Azeez Ojulari has had in that span of time was against a backup left tackle in Pittsburgh and Calvin Anderson. So all of that to say is I don't know if you're really dramatically different of players, right? Based off of the body of work. Despite just looking at the sack numbers. And again, I think that's a very, very narrow and wrong way of looking at it. But, if you were to trade a 4th round pick for Azeez Ojulari, to me, that would essentially be choosing Azeez Ojulari as your long-term, number 2 or number 3 pass rusher over Arnold Ebiketie. And the reason for that is because we've seen the Falcons already trade a 3rd round pick to Matthew Judon. And, unless Judon really turns it on in the second half of the season, he's probably going to be one and done here in Atlanta. And so if you were to give up a 4th round pick now on top of that move, there's going to be a lot more pressure for you to get more out of Azeez Ojulari than renting him for the next 8+ games. And you would have to give him, or you wouldn't have to, but there would be a lot of pressure for the Falcons to sign Ojulari to an extension at this point in time. And, in order to justify the trade. And I don't think Ojulari has done enough to justify the type of extension that he may or may not get at this point in time for some of the reasons I mentioned in terms of the pressures and the sacks, not necessarily looking on as good on film as they may look on the stat sheet. But, let's say hypothetically you do wind up trading that 4th round pick for Azeez Ojulari. You do wind up paying him. You're basically going to be in the same predicament with Arnold Ebiketie next year that the New York Giants are in with Azeez Ojulari this year, which is you're going to have a player that you're probably not going to be paying, that you're going to be shopping Arnold Ebiketie next year at the trade deadline, like the Giants are shopping him Azeez at this year's, because hypothetically, again, no guarantees, but you're probably not going to be done with your pass rush with Azeez Ojulari. You're not stopping with just adding Azeez Ojulari and thinking him and Arnold Ebiketie are going to be your long-term answers at edge rusher, right? Instead, you're probably going to invest significant resources this offseason in upgrading that position, whether that's in free agency, whether that's with your number 1 draft pick, right? The Falcons are still looking for a Batman. And essentially, you're betting on, by trading a 4th, again, in a hypothetical world where you traded a 7th for an edge rusher, you probably wouldn't be making the same bet. But if you're trading a 4th, you're giving up that value. You're basically saying this guy is he's not going to be our Batman, but he's definitely going to be our Robin. And I don't think at this point in time you can really say convincingly that someone like Azeez Ojulari is a much better Robin than what Arnold Ebiketie has proved to be. And Arnold Ebiketie hasn't proven to be a Robin. Or, Arnold Ebiketie's basically at this point in time, he's probably like a 3rd or 4th guy, right? But guess what? Azeez Ojulari has been in New York for his entire career, a 3rd or 4th guy, right? Early in his career, he was working behind, Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams. And now currently he's working behind Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, and Kayvon Thibodeau, although Thibodeau's hurt at this point in time. And it's basically, if the Falcons were to trade for Azeez Ojulari, it'd be like, oh, we believe he's going to be a number 2 here. Even though he's only been a number 3 or number 4 previously, he's going to make that leap to be a number 2. And again, are we there yet with Azeez Ojulari? Again, we might be there by the end of the season. Right? He might play well enough down the stretch in Atlanta or in New York where you would feel much better making that bet once we get to March and you can, sign him in free agency or extend him to a contract. But, now that he's going to stay in New York, he's going to be a free agent in March because the Giants are almost certainly not going to pay him after the season. We'll see. Again, maybe there's like a 2% chance they pay him or something like that. But, you can still get Azeez Ojulari in 2025 and still have your 4th round pick. So you can kind of have your cake and eat it too, if you ask me. So there was, to me, no real reason for the Falcons to be aggressive trying to get Azeez Ojulari or really any other pass rusher for at least a 4th round pick at the trade deadline. And so again, the question is Azeez Ojulari or anybody else that number 2? Probably not, right? We're looking for a Batman. There's Batman, there's Robin, and there's Alfred, right? And Azeez Ojulari up to this point is an Alfred. Arnold Ebiketie up to this point is an Alfred. The Falcons have too many Alfreds, I guess, if you're following what I'm putting down at this point. If you're not up on your Batman lore, then what are we doing in the year of our 2024? But we already have enough Alfreds. We don't need another Alfred. Again, you can draft an Alfred in the 4th round or something like that, but I'm not going to pay an Alfred, at this point in time, or at least pay, a premium for an Alfred at this point in time. We need a Batman. We need a Robin, not another Alfred. And I think that's really where Azeez Ojulari is at this point. At this point in time, he's just another Alfred. We have more than enough of those guys. And so the Falcons not being aggressive at the trade deadline to try to get another Alfred, it's like, just wait, see what opportunities come this offseason where you're going to have a much better opportunity to find a Batman and or a Robin in the offseason, rather than hoping that you're going to be able to turn an Alfred into one of those guys, which is the case with someone like an Azeez Ojulari. So, if the Falcons were, hypothetically speaking, going to trade a 4th round pick for anybody at the trade deadline, like, to me, the one player that you could legitimately say is a Robin, not a Batman, but a Robin, is Josh Sweat of the Philadelphia Eagles. But given how he's played as of late, the Eagles are probably going to re-sign him. But he's probably slated at this point in time, looking over the free agent list of impending free agents, he's probably slated to be the top edge on the free agent market. So we'll see if he becomes available. But that's a dude that is a Robin that would have, in my opinion, been worth a 4th round pick. But for me, it's a lot of it is, a fundamental disagreement. I know some of you guys disagree with this, and that's fine. All right. We all have slightly different opinions about the football team and the football players and all that stuff. But it's like, to me, it's like, what are we chasing here by making this trade, by being aggressive at the trade deadline, right? A slightly better chance of getting bounced in the 2nd round of the playoffs. Like, sure. Is that worth a 7th round pick? Sure. Is that worth a 4th round pick? Not to me. Maybe, again, your mileage may vary, but like, to me, that 4th round pick would be much better suited to building, adding to what should be a much better team in 2025 and or 2026, right? You're going to have basically your entire offense, with maybe the exception of Drew Dalman, return next year. So you're going to be in a great position. And again, hopefully Zach Robinson returns and all that. But, Kirk's going to be a year removed from the Achilles, so he'll even be better next year. So all arrows are pointing up next year. And again, to me, that 4th round pick is better suited to maximize your potential ceiling, which is, to me, much higher in 2025 than trying to maximize whatever you think the ceiling is for this Falcon team in 2024. Now, of course, you're going to sit there and say it's the NFL. It's not for long. There's no guaranteed success next year if you wait till next year. All that stuff. I get that. But, we're going to have a conversation in March about this team being complacent next year. But I don't feel like, hammering the team for being, quote unquote, too complacent now in November, or should I say Kirkvember, is really a conversation. I just think, like, what are we chasing here? Again, that's the point. And so, like, to me, the upside is, potentially tremendous in the long term. The short term upside is just like, all right, you want to get bounced by the Packers or the 49ers in the 2nd round of the playoffs, or again, whoever. Again, I'm just saying stuff. But, like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just like, all right, cool, man. All right. Like, again, your mileage may vary, but I'm just happy for the Falcons to make the playoffs after 6 years of them not making the playoffs. So whatever happens in January is gravy to me at that point in time. But again, you may be of a different mindset. So let me know in the comments, why this is a despicable move on the part of the Falcons, or do you agree with me on that front? But we'll move on and break down the All-22 review and talk about the defense, right? And look at the defensive players that the Falcons are betting on that are currently on the roster making improvements. Did those guys make improvements? And what were some of the scheme changes that may have facilitated an improved pass rush where the Falcons had 3 sacks against the Dallas Cowboys? We'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Falcon fans, remember our great partner, Ultimate Pro Football GM. Well, they're back, and they've added an amazing new game mode. Not only can you get your Terry Fontenot on as a GM and lead your team to glory, but they now have a new head coach career mode. So on top of being able to build your dynasty by drafting players, signing free agents, and hiring coaches, you can also now call the plays. Ultimate Pro Football GM is completely free, has no ads, and is 100% playable offline, so you can play on the go as you want, when you want to. And here's a special offer for our Locked On listeners. Use the promo code Locked On NFL, all one word, all caps, inside the game store to receive a free boost to your franchise. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the app stores. Again, use that promo code Locked On NFL in the game store to receive that free boost. Ultimate Pro Football GM. Start your dynasty today. And guys, I want to tell you about Prize Picks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 10 million active users, because it's the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Because unlike other apps, Prize Picks is just you against the numbers. All you got to do is pick more or less on at least 2 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. And you can now win up to 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. And if you're looking to get in on the action because certain sports books aren't available in your state, like Georgia, Prize Picks is, and withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. I can get my money in as quickly as 15 minutes. And if you are like me, you've just been hammering that more on Bijan Robinson as well as Darnell Mooney all year long and watching the winnings roll in. So check it out by downloading the Prize Picks app today. Use code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly when you play $5. Prize Picks, run your game. So looking at the Falcons' defensive scheme in the Cowboys game, they kind of reverted their scheme a little. Now, they continue to play a hefty dose of man coverage. They called man coverage on about 28% of their snaps, and I think they probably would have played more man coverage than that had they not been so interested in trying to protect their lead in the second half and playing zone and letting Cowboys dink and dunk and all that stuff in the fourth quarter and being like, okay, y'all can take these 6-yard and 8-yard completions all you want because we got a 2-score lead and all that stuff. But when they did play zone, it was a hefty dose of cover 3 zone coverage, which they have sort of moved away from since the Week 6 Panthers game. It was about 34% of their zone or all their coverage snaps and their preferred zone coverage. Cover 2 and cover 6, which they have dialed up a lot more the last couple of weeks, only 11% each for those 2 coverages, 15% for cover 4. So, this could have been a game plan specific for this Cowboys offense, but these coverage percentages of the zone coverages is much more in line with what we saw in the first 5 games of the season from a zone standpoint. And I think it was generally effective. So I have no complaints about the Falcons, quote unquote, regressing their scheme back to what they were doing earlier in the season when I was much more critical of that scheme because it was effective against this Cowboys offense because Dallas was just basically like, okay, we'll dink and dunk, but we're not going to push the ball at all down the football field. And that's how the Falcons want to play. It's like, this is the type of game where when you talk about the Jimmy Lake, Raheem Morris scheme, this is kind of it where they're not really giving up explosive plays. Teams are able to complete passes, but they are able to get pressure on the quarterback. So, when Dallas was throwing the football, they did target the slot corners a lot. We thought that was going to be the case with CeeDee Lamb spending a bunch of time in there. I counted 11 targets for D. Alford, including the 2-point conversion in this game. And you also saw late in the game when A.J. Terrell exited the game for 4 plays and Kevin King came in and played the slot with Clark Phillips playing on the outside. Kevin King got targeted like 3 out of those 4 plays. And we saw the pass rush be effective. Kaden Ellis, Arnold Ebiketie, Grady Jarrett all had effective games. I counted 7 pressures for AK, 6 for Kaden Ellis, 5 for Grady Jarrett. And the Falcons were effective using some cross dog blitzes to free up those guys, some stunts as well. Stunts with AK and Arnold Ebiketie and Grady Jarrett have been pretty effective in recent weeks. There were at least 2 of Grady's pressures in this game came off of a stunt, specifically with Arnold Ebiketie. A sack, I think, came off of a stunt with Matthew Judon. One of Arnold Ebiketie's pressures came off of a stunt. It was with Damon Harris late in the game because Grady was out of the game at that point in time. But you could imagine that could have gotten going if Grady Jarrett had been healthy. And so that's a combination that has been much more effective and been a contributing factor to why you've seen this uptick in production from Arnold Ebiketie and Grady Jarrett over the last month. And so that's something that I feel like the Falcons can continue to hammer home, the stunts and whatnot, in addition to all the good things that Kaden Ellis has also been doing over that period of time. So the pass rush, while we're not going to sit here and gaslight you guys and tell you, oh, this is a great pass rush, it has been trending upward over the last month than where it was before. And so hopefully it will continue to trend up or at least maintain so that we can at least sit here and say it's an okay pass rush. Like, I think they got pressure on like 50% of their snaps in this game. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but another play that stepped up big in this game after being absent for the last month was Kentavious Street. I counted 4 pressures from Kentavious Street in this game. He had a very good game stepping in, playing a lot more nose tackle in this game than Eddie Goldman. I think Eddie Goldman only played 3 snaps, although Eddie Goldman made the most of those 3 snaps. He got a pressure on that Rico Dowdle touchdown, probably would have had a sack if Arnold Ebiketie hadn't sideswiped him on that particular play, and that would have prevented the touchdown. So I'm going to continue to push for more snaps for Eddie Goldman in this Falcons defense, especially with the nickel. They've only been using him exclusively in the base defense as a nose tackle. I want more Eddie Goldman snaps in the nickel fronts. Sub out maybe, sorry TQ, but Taquan Graham, who's playing decent, but he's probably the weakest link of that D-line group. So we'll see. But I part of me wondered, okay, watching the film and wondering what was going to happen at the trade deadline, was this a showcase game for Kentavious Street so the Falcons could move him at the trade deadline? Same thing goes with D'Angelo Malone, who got a way more snaps, basically got more snaps in this game than I think he's had combined in the 2 previous years. And so Street stepped up. D'Angelo Malone had a couple of moments, but didn't really step up. And so, I guess they'll be back for the second half of the season. So we'll see what they can do. The other thing, talking about some of the positives, but the one negative I'll point out for the defense was Nate Landman, to me, probably had his worst game from a coverage standpoint this week. He arguably was responsible for both of the team's 2 explosive plays allowed in the first half. The 27-yarder on the opening play to Jake Ferguson, he whiffed on the tackle there. The 22-yard scramble to Dak Prescott, where he was the spy and kind of was slow reacting to that play, lacked the pursuit speed to chase down Dak once he got outside. And then he arguably blew that coverage on the Rico Dowdle touchdown that Dak stepped up and avoided the sack, and Dowdle bobbled it on his back and whatnot, because initially Nate Landman passed off Dowdle to Justin Simmons, but then when Dowdle retraced his steps, I think it was he basically became Landman's man again, but because Landman's eyes were stuck in the backfield, that left Dowdle wide open in the end zone. And so I think those 2 plays were down. And so I say that not to be a hater on Nate Landman. I don't hate him, contrary to popular opinion. I just always push back against the idea that he was a starting caliber linebacker. And I think games like this show why, he's limited in that regard from a coverage standpoint, from a speed and athleticism standpoint, that just it can't hold up for a full season as a starter over the course in today's NFL. And so those limitations, I think, were on display in this game. Those limitations existed last year. I just think last year's coaching staff kind of went out of their way to hide those limitations as much as they possibly could. This year's coaching staff has not done that to the same degree, and that's one of the reasons why it has been exposed. I think that's one of the reasons why, some people are critical of this coaching staff, which is fair to a certain extent. This is, I don't know if the Falcons really have a solution because they don't really have a great dime option unless you count Richie Grant. I don't count Kevin King personally. This is where DeMarco Hellams, we need you, my guy. We need DeMarco Hellams coming through that door to be that savior, and so that we don't have to necessarily use Nate Landman. But we'll see if Troy Anderson comes back this week. The Falcons desperately need Troy Anderson in this particular matchup to deal with Alvin Kamara, because boy, you do not want Nate Landman out there on the field with being asked to cover Alvin Kamara. And if you don't have him, it's going to ask Kaden Ellis to do that job, which was what the Falcons did last year. Kaden Ellis performed well, but now you're taking away from the player that has been one of your 3 best pass rushers over the last couple of weeks. And so now you're following me where it's like your pass rush is not going to continue to trend if Kaden Ellis is now being asked to play in coverage and whatnot. And again, these were all things that were true last year with Nate Landman, and why I was like, he's a backup and not a starter. But again, your mileage may vary on that. So I think the defense continues to evolve. There's positive things to take away from this game. We'll see if they continue that evolution and the positive takeaways in future games, right? So that maybe by the time we get to January, right, and the Falcons are playing meaningful games, we can make it to the second round of the playoffs without necessarily having to make a trade for Azeez Ojulari. So we'll see if the Falcons can keep trending in that direction. But we'll wrap up talking about the offense. We'll revise what we gave on the Kirk Cousins Chaos Meter after reviewing the film, and we'll talk about where I went wrong with Darnell Mooney to wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So, guys, it's time to get ready and get back into the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. And the FanDuel Sportsbook app is going to give you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view the live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets, all at FanDuel.com. So join today, and again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet at FanDuel.com. And why not make your first $5 bet on this Falcons-Saints matchup in Week 10? If you're wondering how does the Marshawn Lattimore trade impact this weekend's action, Find out tomorrow on Crossover Thursday. But at least according to FanDuel Sportsbook, the line has moved in the Falcons' favor from 3 points to 3.5 points. So Marshawn Lattimore's presence on the Saints defense is worth at least half a point. So check it out at FanDuel. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. So I do need to make a revision to the Kirk Cousins Chaos Meter, which is something we haven't done now that I've reviewed the film. Like, if you listen to Sunday night's rapid reaction, I gave Kirk, like, he barely crossed over into a level 3, which is peak Kirk Cousins. I got to pull that back. He was a level 2. He was a game manager. It's fine. You know, he was a 2.5, if you will, a quality game manager, but, you know, game manager plus. But it was a level 2 game. The chaotic moments with Kirk were not really on Kirk. I was trying to attribute other people's chaos, other people missing blocks, other people making mistakes on Kirk as chaos, you know, and I got to revise that. So first time this season, we have to revise the Kirk Cousins chaos meter and whatnot. And if you're not familiar with that, that's, you know, something we got from Locked On Vikings. You know, there's 5 levels now. It used to be 4 on the Locked On Vikings. I added a 5th level. Level 1 means Kirk is being way too conservative. Level 2 is him being what he's been for most of his career, which is an effective game manager. Level 3 is peak Kirk Cousins, where you get a little bit of chaos to get Kirk from being that game manager to, you know, a big time playmaker. We've seen some games like that, like the Bucks game and others this season. Level 4 is too much chaos, and it's a bad thing. And level 5 is the chaos has reached the point where it's like we need to start having a conversation about benching Kirk and playing Michael Penix. We haven't reached level 5. Hopefully we will not reach level 5 for a very long time, but we'll see on that front. So wanted to make that revision on today's episode since we haven't done that. Usually we've been pretty accurate, but I knew in the moment that I was like, is this really a 3.1 game or is this really like a 2.9 game? And I was like, I went 3.1, but it's really a level 2 game. But let's talk about Darnell Mooney, right? We'll get deep into Darnell Mooney on the extended All-22 breakdown, but I'm here to say here on the regular All-22 breakdown that I was wrong about Darnell Mooney. I'm finally admitted now, you know, 10 weeks into the season, you know, he's been the NFL's second most explosive receiver, one explosive play behind Justin Jefferson. He's tied for second place with Green Bay's Jaden Reed with 14 20-plus yard plays. Now, you could certainly argue if Nico Collins and A.J. Brown were healthy for the entire season, they might, you know, be ahead of him as well. But, you know, the fact that Darnell Mooney is in the top 5 is an incredible achievement, something I never saw coming. So shout out to Darnell Mooney, shout out to Kirk Cousins, shout out to Zach Robinson for making it work and proving me wrong. It's been, you know, watching the film against the Cowboys, it was shades of Calvin Ridley. It's been shades of Calvin Ridley all year long, but I have been, you know, refusing to admit it this season. And so now I'm finally ready to admit it after watching Mooney against the Cowboys. Now, there's still flaws in Mooney's game, which was one of the reasons why I was not as high on the signing as other people. I didn't think he was going to be like a bad signing, but I saw him more as a high-end number 3 than a true blue high-end number 2, which he has played at for most of the season. And again, I know you guys are still going to think I'm a hater, but, you know, I got to point out the flaws in the player because, you know, I love to nitpick. But, you know, again, a lot of it is just because, like, I want you to understand where I was coming from, why I was so quote unquote down on Darnell Mooney, why I was quote unquote hating on Darnell Mooney, because I saw these flaws in this game. And you see those flaws show up from time to time. He still body catches a little too much. He's not the greatest guy after the catch. He's not consistently winning on contested catches or back shoulder throws. You know, he can have some issues getting off of press and all that sort of stuff. And those flaws showed up in the Dallas game. But again, one of the reasons why I want to highlight him more is because I think a couple of times he was able to overcome those issues in this game than he was in previous games. And so that deserves to be highlighted. But, you know, I think the Falcons, despite those flaws, Mooney, Zach Robinson, Kirk Cousins, all those guys have done an excellent job maximizing Mooney's strengths and minimizing those weaknesses. And those strengths, you know, rely on his quickness, his burst, his separation ability, and all those various things. And, you know, I went into the season thinking, you know, these flaws are going to show up, you know, 10 times a game, and they've only really shown up like 2 times in each of these games. So, you know, I was also dismissive of his ability as a vertical threat. Now, he hasn't been, you know, this sort of take the top off the defense, which is one of the reasons why I was down on it, because it's like he's not that guy, but he has been, you know, I won't say flawless, but like he's been excellent on those sort of intermediate, that 15 to 25 yard range, rather than taking the top off defense, just running those out-breaking routes, the corners, the comebacks, the deep outs, all those various things that the Falcons have used over and over and over again to why they have had so much success generating those explosive plays. He's been excellent in that regard. And that's where the shades of Calvin Ridley, because I haven't seen a Falcons receiver like that since we saw Calvin Ridley last at his peak back in 2020. And so, I don't think it's fair to call Darnell Mooney a one-note player, which I probably would have 10 weeks ago. But I feel like the Falcons have done an excellent job playing the quote-unquote limited notes that I thought he had 10 weeks ago. They have played those notes superbly. It's an orchestra, it's an extravaganza, all that sort of stuff. So my one concern with Darnell Mooney, all that to say, going into this Week 10 matchup, especially if Drake London doesn't play, right? That Mooney is not necessarily the possession receiver. He's the explosive playmaker, right? And London has been that sort of possession, move the chains. You need a first down on third or down. It's Mooney. However, it's not to sit here and say that Darnell Mooney hasn't. It's London that makes the third down plays, but it's not to say that Mooney hasn't made. He's had more third and fourth down conversions than Drake London this year. He's tied for the NFL lead with touchdowns on fourth downs and whatnot. So he has made a number of plays on critical downs. So it's not to say he can't do it. But it was an issue against the Cowboys where the Falcons did struggle on third downs after Drake London exited the game. And I wonder, against the Saints, a team that theoretically is built to basically, maximize Mooney's weaknesses because they play a lot of press man coverage, especially a lot of press, not as much man coverage as they historically have. And I think a lot of that is owed to not having Marshawn Lattimore and other injuries in the secondary. But basically, what I'm sitting here saying is, if I'm constructing a game plan, like if we're going into this game with Darnell Mooney and no Drake London, if I'm the Saints, I'm constructing my game plan to shut down Darnell Mooney. And the way that I would construct that game plan is we're just going to press him. We're going to press him the whole game. And so, the question is, of course, with Marshawn Lattimore gone, I don't know what Kool-Aid McKinstry's status is going to be. Can the Saints accomplish that? Again, we'll find out tomorrow on Crossover Thursday with Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints. But, if that does come to pass, how do the Falcons adjust, right? And the way I would probably adjust is probably running a lot of stack concepts, a lot of bunch concepts to prevent the Saints from pressing him, if that's the case, if I'm Zach Robinson. So we'll break that down much further in the extended All-22 review, talking about Darnell Mooney, talking about some of the defensive changes. We'll also look at a couple of plays from Bijan Robinson. He continues to be an incredible football player, making guys miss. It felt like almost every time he touched the ball against the Cowboys, somebody on that Cowboys defense was either eating turf or grabbing at air. So we'll look at a couple of those plays on the extended All-22 review, which should drop Wednesday afternoon at some point. If you want to become a Locked On Falcons insider to get that exclusive access to an extended All-22 review, where you get to not only hear me talk about these plays, but actually look at the film of these plays I'm talking about, and much, much more than what I'm talking about in these quote-unquote regular All-22 reviews, all you have to do is hit that link in the description below at joinsubtext.com/LockedOnFalcons, right? And guess what, guys? It's a free 14-day trial. So you can try it for free for 2 weeks. You can get this Cowboys breakdown. You can get next week's Saints breakdown, and potentially the following week's Broncos breakdown, extended All-22 review for free. Try it out. See if you like it. If you enjoy it, then you pay $4.99 a month thereafter, or you can cancel. No fuss, no muss, all that sort of stuff. So check out the extended All-22 review by becoming a Locked On Falcons insider, as well as, if you were an insider, you got all my insights onto all the comings and goings on the trade deadline in the lead up to the 4:00 deadline. So you knew hours before my thoughts on the Falcons trading, or not trading, and so that's another reason to sign up to become a Locked On Falcons insider. So guys, appreciate you tuning in for another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast. We'll be back tomorrow with a crossover Thursday with Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints. Continue to make us your first listen by checking us out and subscribing and following for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, make sure you check out the rest of the great content on the Locked On Podcast Network covering this trade deadline. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.